Most Nerf herders, listen up! Welcome to another critical review. I'm Captain Xavier, and today I'm going to be critically reviewing this thing, the Nerf Elite 2.0 Trio. I'll first be looking at it from just a regular consumer, someone who's not likely to repair it, who has no interest in modding it. How does it compare to its predecessor, both in function and ergonomics and design and all of that? Then I will take a look at what it would take to repair it, should something go wrong with the primary mechanism, and then I will fully disassemble it to show how that has been affected by their changes. So the predecessor was, of course, the Elite Triad EX3. They're both handle-primed, muzzle-loaded, 3-barreled Smart AR systems. The Smart AR system, of course, makes it so that it doesn't matter what barrel you load, it will fire it. If you have them all loaded, it fires them in a particular sequence. In this case, it fires from the top down. This one fires in a circle. Performance-wise, they are exactly the same. They got between 60 and 70 FPS, with the first barrel being the highest and the bottom barrel, or the last barrel, being the lowest. So this one was getting 70, 65, 63. This one pretty much got the same as it went around. And that's just because of inefficiencies and dead space that exist within the Smart AR system. The last barrel always tends to be the weakest. Both, like I said, prime from the bottom, fairly straightforward. They both have pretty much identical trigger mechanisms, catch mechanisms. They use a plastic tab as part of the trigger as both the catch spring and the trigger release spring. And you can kind of see them moving there as I pull the triggers. And since the predecessor had that same system, I don't hold that against them. I don't see that as an unnecessary cost cutting. That was just how they've always designed these blasters. It is considerably bigger. And when you place them on top, it's pretty much all the exact same size, but this has a lot more shell around the top here. From an ergonomic standpoint, I do actually prefer the Triad because of these two little tabs they have on the bottom of the grip, which makes it actually fit my hand. There's just a little bit more here in the palm and something to hold my pinky because I have large hands. This one does not have that, and my pinky tends to fall off, and it just doesn't quite feel like you've got a handful. It just feels like it's missing something. But they are obviously smaller and made for children, so again, can't really complain too much about that. The larger shell has allowed them to add some features, which you may or may not like. The smaller design did make it easy to make holsters for. I have 3D printed holsters, and you can easily fit these in pockets and whatnot. This one is obviously larger, and that would be a little bit more difficult. But in exchange for the larger design, they've added sling mounts and tack rail, which would allow you to put a sling on this and just put it over your shoulder and have it as a last ditch kind of on the side blaster. And the top rail would allow you to attach, I mean, you could put a scope on it, that'd be silly. Somebody pointed out the more useful thing to put there would be dart storage, because this doesn't have any inherently, and they did make dart storage in previous lines. I don't think they have any for the Elite 2.0 line. It's one of the complaints about changing the color, is now none of the attachments match. And I'm not a fan of the color from an aesthetic standpoint. I liked the blue. I thought it was a striking, solid, strong blue. This is just, to me, the beige of metallic blues. If they had done this with an orange metallic, I would have loved it so much. But they didn't. They went with blue. If you're into this shade of blue, this is obviously the best thing ever for you because it's exactly in your colors. And they are very easy to paint, which we will see later. I do also like that the barrels are in line. I think that makes it much easier to aim. And this one having the two barrels offset, and if you're not sure which barrel is about to fire next, that could make it difficult to aim, whereas this one they all line up nicely. So that's pretty much from a consumer perspective. It has all the same, it actually has more features, has the same performance, uses the same mechanisms. So if you're just looking for a little Smart AR pistol to plink with, this one isn't bad if you don't mind the fact that it's a little bit bigger. The cost was the same, so that's all fairly well and good. Now, let's look at what it would take to repair this thing. In the Triad, it had 4 screws on the bottom. You take them out and you could access the mainspring and the plunger and all of that. And it was fairly straightforward. This one, unfortunately, doesn't have that. There are no screws anywhere in this. There are no metal pegs. There's just the mainspring and then the Smart AR springs is the only metal that is in here. And so around the grip, you can see 4 notches for the 4 clips that are holding the bottom part of the handle on. But it is actually fairly easy to open, it turns out, if you have the right tool. You could do this with a screwdriver, but it would mar up your shell, and so I recommend using those laptop bezel tools that I had last time. I've cut the back off so I can actually get enough torque. And you're going to push in on the top part of it. It's going to force the clip back and down, and will actually pop it loose fairly easily. And go to the other side, do the same thing over there, and it will pop free. And it's faster than unscrewing, honestly. However, you may have noticed, I only unclipped 3 and not 4. And that is because while doing the first filming, and I was going on about how strong these clips look, I cracked one of the clips. And when I was mentioning that they're strong, is they're actually, if you can see them there, they're T-shaped. There is a support beam on the back that prevents them from getting stress fractures and cracking off like they normally would. If you had clips like that and you were pushing in on, you'd push too far and it would crack the clip off. You can't do that here. However, if you only unclip one of them and then try to torque the shell down without first unclipping the other one, you will crack off the actual lip, and then it won't work anymore. And that speaks partially of brittle plastic, but also of me torquing it in the wrong direction at the wrong time. So be careful of that. The problem is, there is no way for me to repair that. I can't just glue that back on and expect it to hold. There is no glue that is going to make that as strong as it was before. It's a load-bearing part. It's just not going to work. And if you cracked 2 of them, maybe 3, especially if you cracked 3 of them, it's not going to hold anymore, and when you go to prime it, it's going to pop loose. So that is a problem. However, an interesting note that somebody pointed out about the previous shell, there are what appear to be screw posts. Almost as if they had once upon a time planned to make this screw together and then changed their mind. I think it's more likely a manufacturing thing in that those act as the guides so that you can get the shell lined up when you go to clip it back together, so you're not trying to, put them in wrong and busting your clips. But it would be fairly easy to convert this to take screws simply by, on this side, you can see where those posts line up, drilling all the way through the bottom so that you could then put screws in on this side into those screw posts. And I will probably do a whole video where I convert this to take screws just for fun, because I think that would be interesting. I do not have the materials, however, because the nature of these is that I would need 1-inch long Nerf screws, and I don't have any in my screw bin that are actually long enough, so I'm going to have to try to source some. This one you'd have to cut off the lower sling mount because the hole is right underneath it, but that is what it would take to get to the main spring. The post is, of course, not screwed on, it's clipped on, but you could fairly easily Dremel that off, tap a hole, and then use a large washer-headed screw like you see on most to make that so it is removable, so that you could change out the spring if you wanted to, because otherwise it'd be a beast trying to get that spring off of there. So repairs are definitely not as easy, though these were never something that were terribly easy to repair in general, just because of the lack of proper metal springs and all that. But let's take a look at the rest of it. What does it take to get this shell off? Because unlike the Triad, where it doesn't have an outer shell wrapped around the internals, the shell is the internals, this one definitely does have a shell over some sort of internals. The grip is still just the plunger tube, but and doesn't come apart any further, but this blue shell definitely does. So, to get it open, you're going to take your wedging tool, whatever you're using. Somebody mentioned I should try a Lego brick separator, and so I'm actually going to give that a try here. And yeah, that will work. They're available, they're cheap, many of you may already have them. And you just go all the way around, and it actually pops off fairly easily. Make sure you actually pop all of the clips rather than getting it part way and then forcing the shell open like I was doing with the Volt, because that will lead to clips breaking. I did the same thing on this one. I tried to force it and torqued it in the wrong direction and cracked the clip off because I was warping it. Again, it's got the support tab on the back to keep the clip from snapping off entirely, but you can crack the lips off and then it won't go back together. Luckily there are 2 more clips on either side there, but how many clips could you lose before this shell wouldn't hold together? The rest of the internals come right out. The barrel and smart AR system is not solvent welded or even clipped on. It just pops loose, and then the trigger is just popped in there as well. So it disassembles really easily. And once again, you can see screw posts. So you could very easily convert this, just cut all the tabs off, grind them off, clip them off, dremel them off, and put in drill holes so that you could have screws. They'd be showing on the outside, but there's actually fake screws already showing on the outside. So you could make it look good with the right cosmetics if you really wanted this to be screw apart. This isn't one where you're likely to open it up a whole lot. Probably just the once to paint it, because the shells are super easy to paint because there's almost no paint on them. There's just a little bit of Nerf logo and the trio, and you know, a little bit of sanding to rough up the surface, and you could paint this however you wanted, and it looked lovely for steampunk, diesel punk, cyberpunk. I like the shells. I do like the look of them. They have an industrial sci-fi look to them, and I really do like that. Now, reassembly, and this is where things are just plain silly how easy this is, because that goes in, that, put that in place, line up the shell, and done. It takes seconds to assemble this, and that is probably one of the main reasons they did this, because the amount of time and money they're saving in assembly in the factories has got to be astronomical. Not having to deal with screws, not having to deal with little springs, it all just click, 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 click. And that's brilliant. The downside is, of course, it makes it difficult for us, because if we're going to be opening the blaster over and over and over and over again, you're gonna break clips. They're gonna get too much stress, you're gonna torque it wrong, you're gonna pop a clip. And that is a downside. That makes them inferior for our hobby, for our purposes. And that is my chief complaint still. But now we do have tools for getting into them. This actually worked surprisingly well, though these I still think are better just because of the variety of parts you have. Things are really good for tweaking and wedging and stuff like that. But all in all, it's not as bad as I think people have been making it out to be. It is definitely going to be possibly a different story when I get into like the Phoenix and the Turbine, which are blasters you're more likely to open a lot and that are going to have a lot more parts that you're going to have to deal with, and supposedly they've got solvent welds and stuff like that. So I do have those two. They will be on the docket. Probably I will get one of them out next week. But so far, this one wasn't so bad. It's really easy to get into and then really easy to reassemble as long as you're careful and don't break your tabs. But like I said, that's going to happen. So I will also eventually have a video where I convert this one to screws, just for the academia of it all. So stay tuned for that. All right. Now you know how I feel about this thing. It could be better, it could be worse. I liked it so much. I was giving it so much praise, and then 2 tabs cracked, and I had to just, I trusted you. Anyway, all right. There you have it. Hopefully this is helpful to somebody. Thank you guys for watching. I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed.